The crisis began on a Tuesday morning when the orbital monitoring station above Kepler 442b detected the first signs of catastrophic lunar instability. The moon, designated KM7, roughly Earth's Luna in size, had begun exhibiting irregular gravitational fluctuations that threatened to tear apart the delicate ecosystem of the human colony below. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood before the holographic display in the emergency command center, watching the data streams cascade across her field of vision like digital rain. The numbers told a story of impending doom written in the language of physics and orbital mechanics. KM7's orbit was decaying, but not in any predictable pattern the colonists had encountered before. The gravitational anomalies are increasing exponentially, reported Lieutenant Commander Torres from his position at the sensor array. At this rate, we'll have tidal forces strong enough to crack the planet's crust within 72 hours. The colony of New Harmony had been humanity's first successful settlement outside the Sol system. 50,000 souls had made their home on this verdant world, drawn by its stable climate and the promise of a fresh start among the stars. Now, all of that hung in the balance as their moon threatened to become their destroyer. The Galactic Council had been monitoring the situation from their observation posts scattered throughout the sector. Representatives from a dozen advanced civilizations watched with a mixture of scientific curiosity and barely concealed condescension as the humans scrambled to address what appeared to be an impossible problem. Ambassador Zethkar of the Crystalline Hegemony materialized his avatar in the command center, his translucent form shimmering with internal light. Dr. Vasquez, the Council has reviewed your situation. We are prepared to offer immediate evacuation assistance. Our fastest ships can begin removing your population within the hour. Elena didn't look away from her calculations. Thank you for the offer, Ambassador, but we're not ready to abandon our home just yet. Your sentiment is admirable but misguided, Zethkar replied, his melodic voice carrying notes of patronizing concern. The mathematical impossibility of your situation is absolute. No civilization in recorded galactic history has successfully stabilized a moon experiencing this type of orbital cascade failure. The technological requirements alone exceed anything in your current capabilities. Technology, Elena murmured, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface as she manipulated three-dimensional equations in real time. Everyone always assumes technology is the answer. The ambassador's crystalline structure flickered with what might have been confusion. What alternative could possibly exist? The gravitational forces involved require massive energy manipulation systems, gravity generators, or at minimum, a fleet of stellar-class engines to provide course correction thrust. Elena finally turned to face the alien dignitary, and Zethkar was surprised to see not defeat in her eyes, but something that might have been amusement. Ambassador, may I ask you something? In all your observations of galactic civilizations, how many species do you know that developed pure mathematics as extensively as humans have? The question seemed to catch the crystalline ambassador off guard. His form pulsed as he accessed his species' vast databases. Mathematics is a universal constant. All spacefaring civilizations must achieve a certain level of mathematical sophistication to reach the stars. That wasn't what I asked, Elena pressed gently. I'm talking about mathematics pursued for its own sake. Abstract mathematical concepts developed not because they had immediate practical applications, but simply because they were beautiful, elegant, or intellectually challenging. Zethkar's silence spoke volumes. In the background, other members of Elena's team continued their frantic calculations, but she had their attention now. Dr. James Chen, the colony's chief mathematician, had been working steadily at a quantum processor array, his hands moving in complex patterns as he manipulated equations that existed in 11 dimensions. Most species develop mathematics as a tool, Elena continued. They learn what they need to build their technology, to navigate space, to manipulate their environment. Humans did that too, but we also developed mathematics as an art form. We pursued mathematical concepts that had no practical application for centuries, sometimes millennia, before we found ways to use them. Lieutenant Commander Torres looked up from his station. Dr. Vasquez, the orbital decay is accelerating. We have maybe 60 hours now. Elena nodded calmly. James, how are we doing with the Calabi-Yau manifold calculations? Dr. Chen didn't look up from his work. The dimensional folding equations are stabilizing. I think we can create a localized spacetime curvature that will act as a gravitational anchor point. Ambassador Zethkar's form brightened considerably, a sign of agitation among his people. That is impossible. Calabi-Yau manifolds are theoretical constructs used to describe string theory. They cannot be practically manipulated. Can't they? Elena asked, gesturing to the holographic display where a complex mathematical model was taking shape. James, show our guest what we've been working on. The display shifted, showing a three-dimensional representation of 11-dimensional mathematical space. To most observers, it would have appeared as an abstract sculpture of flowing curves and intersecting planes, beautiful but incomprehensible. Elena saw something different. She saw the hidden architecture of reality itself. 300 years ago, human mathematicians developed these equations to describe the hidden dimensions of our universe, Elena explained. They had no practical application at the time. It was pure intellectual curiosity. But those equations describe how spacetime can be folded, how gravity can be redirected not through brute force, but through elegant manipulation of the underlying geometric structure of reality. Dr. Chen finally looked up, exhaustion clear in his eyes but excitement in his voice. Elena, I think we have it. The calculations are clean. If we can generate the right harmonic frequencies at the planetary resonance points, we can fold local spacetime into a configuration that creates an artificial Lagrange point. In layman's terms? Torres asked. We're going to create a gravitational parking space, Elena replied. A stable point in space where KM7 can settle into a permanent, stable orbit. Ambassador Zethkar's form flickered rapidly. The energy requirements for such a manipulation would require the output of a star. No civilization possesses such power. Elena smiled, and, for the first time since the crisis began, it reached her eyes. That's the beautiful part, Ambassador. We don't need to generate massive amounts of energy. We just need to apply the right mathematical principles at the right points. It's not about force, it's about understanding. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of activity as Elena's team put their theoretical breakthrough into practice. The colony's quantum computers worked around the clock, calculating the precise frequencies needed to create the spacetime folding effect. Meanwhile, teams of engineers positioned specialized resonance generators at carefully calculated points across New Harmony's surface. The Galactic Council continued to monitor the situation, their observations now tinged with something approaching disbelief. As word spread through the galactic communication networks, representatives from dozens of civilizations requested permission to observe what the humans were attempting. This is unprecedented, reported observer Cletach from the Mechanoid Collective. Our analysis indicates that the human mathematical framework should theoretically work, but the precision required exceeds anything we've ever witnessed. A deviation of more than 0.00001% in their calculations will result in catastrophic failure. They're using mathematics that predate their space program by centuries, added Scholar Twani of the Academic Union. These equations were developed purely for intellectual satisfaction, with no thought of practical application. How could they have predicted this specific need? Ambassador Zethkar found himself oddly defensive of the humans he had been prepared to evacuate just hours earlier. They developed these concepts not because they needed them, but because they were compelled to understand. It appears that pursuit of knowledge for its own sake has provided them with tools the rest of us never thought to develop. On New Harmony's surface, Elena stood in the primary control center as her team made their final preparations. The quantum resonance generators hummed with barely contained energy, their harmonic frequencies carefully tuned to create standing waves in the fabric of spacetime itself. All stations report ready, Torres announced. Resonance generators are online and synchronized. Dr. Chen's hands hovered over the activation controls. Elena, we get one shot at this. If our calculations are off, the gravitational shockwave could destabilize the entire system. Elena looked around the room at her team, mathematicians, engineers, and physicists who had spent their careers pushing the boundaries of human understanding. Each of them had chosen to stay and fight for their home rather than accept evacuation. Each of them believed in the power of pure mathematics to solve what technology could not. James, Elena said quietly, I've been working with these equations since graduate school. I've dreamed about them, published papers about them, and taught them to students who thought they were beautiful abstractions with no practical value. Today, we find out if 3 centuries of human mathematical curiosity was worth it. She nodded to Dr. Chen, who activated the resonance sequence. The effect was not immediately visible to the naked eye, but the instruments registered it instantly. Across New Harmony's surface, the quantum generators began producing precisely calibrated gravitational waves that propagated outward at the speed of light. These waves intersected at specific points in space, creating interference patterns that folded local spacetime according to the mathematical principles first developed by human theorists who had never imagined their work would one day save a world. Gravitational field distortion detected, Torres reported, his voice tense with concentration. The folding effect is propagating according to our models. Above them, KM7 continued its erratic orbit, but the gravitational chaos that had characterized its movement began to show signs of structure. The Moon's path started to settle into something resembling stability as the artificial Lagrange point took shape in the space around it. It's working, Dr. Chen breathed. The spacetime curvature is stabilizing. We're creating a gravitational well that's pulling KM7 into a stable orbit. The process took 6 hours to complete. 6 hours during which the entire Galactic Council watched in fascination as humans accomplished something that should have been impossible with their level of technology. They had no gravity manipulation systems, no stellar engines, no exotic matter generators. They had only their understanding of the universe's hidden mathematical structure. When it was over, KM7 hung in its new orbit like a jewel in the sky, no longer the harbinger of destruction but, once again, the gentle companion that regulated New Harmony's tides and seasons. The crisis was over, solved not through advanced technology but through the application of mathematics developed centuries earlier by humans who sought knowledge for its own beauty. Ambassador Zethkar materialized in the control center once more, but his manner had changed completely. The condescension was gone, replaced by something that might have been awe. Dr. Vasquez, the Galactic Council has asked me to formally request detailed information about your mathematical frameworks. We have never encountered a civilization that developed such sophisticated theoretical constructs without immediate practical applications. Elena leaned back in her chair, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Ambassador, I'd be happy to share our mathematical heritage with the Council. But I think you'll find that the real secret isn't in the specific equations we used. It's in the approach, the willingness to pursue knowledge simply because it's worth knowing. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, Dr. Chen quoted, looking up at the stabilized moon. An old human saying. We spent centuries destroying our assumption that mathematics had to be immediately useful. In doing so, we made ourselves stronger than we realized. The aftermath of the KM7 stabilization sent ripples throughout the Galactic Council that would be felt for generations. Within weeks, delegations from dozens of civilizations arrived at New Harmony, requesting to study human mathematical traditions. Universities that had existed for millennia began restructuring their curricula to include what they termed speculative mathematics, the pursuit of mathematical knowledge without predetermined practical applications. Dr. Elena Vasquez found herself appointed as the first director of mathematical exchange, a position that required her to travel throughout the galaxy, teaching alien civilizations about the human approach to mathematical discovery. It was during one such visit to the Academic Union's primary research station that she encountered the full scope of what humanity had accomplished. Scholar Twani, a being whose species had achieved spaceflight when humans were still learning to make fire, approached Elena with what could only be described as intellectual humility. Director Vasquez, we have spent the last month attempting to replicate your team's calculations. We have succeeded, but only by using computational resources that exceed anything available on your colony world. How did your team perform these calculations with such limited technology? Elena smiled, recognizing the question that lay beneath the obvious one. Scholar Twani, our computers didn't solve that problem. Our computers simply helped us verify what we had already worked out using pure mathematical intuition. Dr. Chen didn't need a quantum computer to understand the Calabi-Yau manifolds. He understood them because he had spent 20 years thinking about them, exploring their properties, and developing an intuitive feel for how they behaved. Intuitive feel? Tvania's translator struggled with the concept. You mean emotional understanding of mathematical constructs? In a way, yes, Elena replied. Humans don't just learn mathematics, we internalize it. We develop relationships with mathematical concepts. We find some equations beautiful, others elegant, still others disturbing or incomplete. This emotional connection drives us to explore mathematical territories that have no obvious practical value. Tvania's multiple eyes focused intently on Elena. This emotional mathematics, can it be taught? It can be learned, Elena corrected gently. But, it requires a fundamental shift in how you approach mathematical knowledge. You have to be willing to spend years, sometimes decades, exploring ideas that may never have practical applications. You have to find joy in the pure elegance of mathematical truth. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from New Harmony. Elena excused herself and retreated to a private communication chamber, where the familiar face of Lieutenant Commander Torres appeared on the holographic display. Elena, we have a situation, Torres began without preamble. We've been monitoring communications from the outer colonies, and it appears that 3 more systems are experiencing similar lunar instabilities. The patterns are identical to what we saw with KM7. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. That's impossible. The type of orbital decay we experienced should be a once-in-a-millennium event. That's what we thought too, but the data is unambiguous. Colony ships Artemis, Endeavour, and New Horizon are all reporting identical gravitational anomalies affecting their orbital bodies. The Galactic Council is in emergency session. Elena closed her eyes, her mind already racing through possibilities. Torres, has anyone considered that these might not be natural phenomena? What do you mean? The mathematical precision required to create the type of orbital instability we experienced, it would be nearly impossible to achieve by accident. Someone or something with an incredibly sophisticated understanding of gravitational dynamics would be needed to orchestrate this kind of cascade failure. The implications of her suggestion hung in the air between them. If Elena was right, then humanity wasn't dealing with natural disasters but with deliberate attacks that required mathematical sophistication beyond anything the Galactic Council had previously encountered. Elena, if you're right, then whoever is behind this has been watching our response to the KM7 crisis. They know we can solve these problems, which means the real test is just beginning, Elena finished. Torres, I'm coming home. And bring Dr. Chen up to speed on everything. If we're facing an enemy who uses mathematics as a weapon, we're going to need every advantage our mathematical traditions can provide. The journey back to New Harmony took 3 days aboard a council transport ship, and Elena spent every moment of the trip immersed in the data from the affected colonies. The patterns were indeed too precise to be natural. Someone had calculated exactly how to destabilize the orbital mechanics of human settlements. But, more troubling was the sophistication required for such an attack. Dr. Chen met her at the spaceport, his usual calm demeanor replaced by barely contained urgency. Elena, I've been analyzing the gravitational signatures from all 3 incidents. Whoever is doing this understands mathematics at a level that rivals our best theorists. They're not just causing random chaos, they're creating specific harmonic resonances designed to amplify natural orbital instabilities. Any idea who we're dealing with? That's the strange part. The mathematical frameworks they're using incorporate principles that we've developed but that don't appear in any known alien mathematical traditions. It's almost as if someone has been studying human mathematics and using it against us. They made their way to the expanded command center that had become the de facto headquarters for what the Council was now calling the Orbital Crisis Response Initiative. Representatives from the affected colonies appeared as holograms around a central display, their faces showing varying degrees of panic and determination. Captain Sarah Martinez of the Artemis colony spoke first. Director Vasquez, our situation is deteriorating faster than what you experienced with KM7. We estimate 18 hours before our moon's tidal forces become catastrophic. Same for us, added Commander Williams from the Endeavour settlement. Our mathematical team has been working around the clock, but they can't replicate your stabilization technique. The dimensional calculations are beyond our computational capacity. Elena studied the data streams from each colony, noting subtle differences in the gravitational disturbances. These aren't identical attacks, she realized. Each one has been specifically tailored to the unique characteristics of each system. Whoever is behind this has done detailed reconnaissance of every human settlement. Dr. Chen pulled up a comparative analysis. Elena, look at this. The attack patterns show an understanding not just of orbital mechanics, but of human psychology. Each crisis has been designed to create maximum panic while still allowing just enough time for a response. It's as if someone wants to test our capabilities under extreme pressure. A test, Elena murmured. But why test us? What would be the point of? Her words were cut off by an incoming priority transmission. The holographic display shifted to show a figure that none of them recognized, humanoid in basic structure but clearly not human. The being's skin had a metallic sheen, and its eyes held an intelligence that seemed both ancient and calculating. "Greetings, humans of New Harmony," the figure said, its voice carrying harmonics that suggested technological enhancement. "I am Designate Prime of the Mathematical Collective. Your species has achieved something that we believed to be impossible." Elena stepped forward. "Are you responsible for the orbital attacks on our colonies?" "Attacks?" Prime seemed genuinely puzzled by the terminology. "These are examinations. Tests of capability. Your species has demonstrated mathematical sophistication that our models indicated was incompatible with your technological development level. We required verification." "Verification for what purpose?" Elena demanded, anger building in her voice. "You've put thousands of lives at risk with your tests." Prime's expression shifted, and Elena caught a glimpse of something that might have been embarrassment. The mathematical collective has observed the development of thousands of civilizations over millions of years. Never have we encountered a species that pursued mathematical knowledge for purely aesthetic reasons. Our initial analysis suggested this was impossible. Mathematics without immediate practical application serves no evolutionary purpose. Dr. Chen joined Elena at the communication station. "So you decided to test whether our mathematical approach actually worked?" "Precisely. We created scenarios that could not be resolved through technological intervention, only through sophisticated mathematical understanding. Your response to the KM7 incident exceeded our projections by several orders of magnitude." Elena felt a cold realization wash over her. "The other colonies, Artemis, Endeavour, New Horizon, you've designed their tests to be increasingly difficult, haven't you?" Prime's metallic features arranged themselves into what might have been approval. "Correct. Each examination builds upon the previous, requiring greater mathematical sophistication and more creative applications of theoretical constructs. We must understand the full extent of human mathematical capability." "And if our people fail your tests?" Torres asked grimly. Prime was silent for a moment that stretched uncomfortably long. The mathematical collective has encountered 17 species that showed promise for mathematical advancement beyond the practical minimum. 16 failed to achieve their theoretical potential. They remain in our archives as cautionary examples. The implications were clear, and Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the command center's temperature. "You're not just testing us. You're deciding whether humanity deserves to survive." "Survival is not the issue," Prime corrected. "The universe contains countless biological civilizations capable of survival. What interests the mathematical collective is the potential for genuine mathematical transcendence. Your species appears to be approaching the threshold where mathematics becomes more than a tool, where it becomes a fundamental aspect of consciousness itself." Dr. Chan leaned forward. "What happens if we pass your tests?" "Then, humanity would be invited to join the mathematical collective. Your unique approach to mathematical development would be preserved and enhanced. You would gain access to mathematical frameworks that we have been developing for millions of years.
And if we fail?
Prime's answer was delivered with the same neutral tone, but Elena sensed the weight behind the words.
Failed species are relocated to preserve galactic stability.
They are provided with suitable worlds and allowed to develop naturally, but they are prevented from achieving interstellar expansion that might interfere with more advanced civilizations. Elena felt the weight of her species' future settling on her shoulders.
How many more tests?
The examinations are progressive. Each colony that successfully stabilizes its orbital mechanics will face increasingly sophisticated challenges.
The final examination will require mathematical capabilities that transcend current human understanding.
The communication ended abruptly, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Elena stared at the empty display, her mind racing through possibilities and implications. Humanity was being tested by beings whose mathematical sophistication exceeded anything in the known galaxy, and failure meant effective imprisonment on whatever worlds the mathematical collective deemed suitable. Elena, Dr. Chen said quietly, we need to contact the affected colonies immediately.
They need to know what they're really facing.
Elena nodded, but her attention was already focused on a different problem.
James, Prime said the final examination would require mathematical capabilities beyond current human understanding. That suggests they're not just testing what we know, they're testing our ability to discover new mathematical truths under pressure. You think we can do it?
Elena looked around the command center, taking in the faces of her team, mathematicians, engineers, and scientists who had chosen to pursue knowledge for its own sake. They had already accomplished something that the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy considered impossible. But the real test was just beginning. James, she said, determination hardening her voice, I think it's time we showed the mathematical collective what 300 years of human curiosity can accomplish when survival depends on it. The next phase of humanity's examination began 12 hours later when Captain Martinez reported successful stabilization of the Artemis colony's orbital crisis. Elena wasn't surprised. Martinez had been a mathematician before becoming a colony commander, and her team included several theorists who had published groundbreaking work on multidimensional calculus.
What did surprise Elena was the nature of the next test.
Rather than another orbital mechanics problem, the colonies began reporting temporal distortions, localized areas where time moved at different rates, creating causality loops that threatened to tear apart the fabric of spacetime itself.
This is beyond orbital mechanics, Dr. Chen observed as he studied the data from the Endeavour colony.
They're testing our understanding of the relationship between mathematics and time itself. Elena nodded, her fingers flying over the holographic interface as she manipulated equations that existed in spaces where time was a variable rather than a constant. The mathematical collective has been developing these frameworks for millions of years. They're showing us mathematics that our species has barely begun to explore. The temporal distortions required solutions that existed at the intersection of pure mathematics and fundamental physics. Elena's team found themselves working with equations that described not just how objects moved through space and time, but how consciousness itself interacted with the mathematical structure of reality. Commander Williams of the Endeavour colony appeared on the display, his face drawn with exhaustion. Director Vasquez, our temporal mathematics team has made progress, but we're running up against a conceptual barrier. The equations work mathematically, but they require us to think about consciousness as a mathematical construct.
We're not sure how to proceed. Elena exchanged glances with Dr. Chen.
They had encountered this barrier in their own work, the point where mathematics stopped being about external reality and became about the nature of awareness itself. It was territory that human mathematicians had explored in purely theoretical terms, but never with the urgency of survival driving their efforts.
Commander Williams, I'm transmitting some theoretical frameworks developed by Dr. Chen's consciousness mathematics group.
They're highly speculative, but they might provide the conceptual tools you need. As Elena worked with the various colonies to address their temporal crises, she began to see the pattern underlying the mathematical collective's examination. Each test was designed not just to assess human mathematical knowledge, but to push humanity toward mathematical discoveries that no species had achieved before. They're not testing whether we can solve their problems, Elena realized during a brief break in the crisis management. They're testing whether we can evolve mathematically in real time, under pressure. Dr. Chen looked up from his work on what he had dubbed consciousness equations, mathematical frameworks that described awareness as a fundamental property of certain geometric structures.
Elena, I think I understand what Prime meant by mathematical transcendence.
They're looking for a species that can discover new mathematical truths through pure intuition, even when those truths challenge the basic assumptions of reality.
Can we do it?
We're already doing it, Chen replied, gesturing to the equations floating in the holographic space around them. Every solution we've found has required us to develop new mathematical concepts on the spot.
We're not just applying known mathematics, we're creating it.
The Endeavour colony successfully resolved their temporal crisis 18 hours later, but Elena barely had time to celebrate before the next phase of the examination began. This time, the challenge appeared simultaneously across all remaining human colonies, reality distortions that seem to violate the basic laws of physics. It's as if someone has rewritten the mathematical constants that govern our universe, reported Dr. Sarah Kim from the New Horizon colony. Gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces, they're all behaving according to different mathematical relationships than what we've always observed. Elena stared at the data in fascination and growing dread. The mathematical collective had created localized areas where the fundamental constants of physics operated according to alternative mathematical frameworks. Solving this crisis would require humanity to develop mathematics that could describe not just their own universe, but any possible universe.
This is the final test, Elena breathed.
They want to see if we can develop universal mathematical principles, mathematics that would work in any possible reality, not just our own. Dr. Chen was already deep in calculations, his hands moving through 11-dimensional space as he manipulated equations that existed beyond the normal constraints of physics.
Elena, this is beautiful.
Terrifying, but beautiful. They're asking us to discover the mathematics of mathematics itself, the meta-mathematical principles that would govern reality creation.
The work required humanity to transcend every mathematical tradition they had ever developed.
Elena found herself collaborating not just with human mathematicians, but with the enhanced consciousness that emerged when their various teams linked their minds through quantum entanglement communications. The boundary between individual mathematical intuition and collective mathematical consciousness began to dissolve. Dr. Chen achieved the breakthrough 36 hours into the crisis. Working with a team of mathematicians whose minds had been linked through quantum consciousness interfaces, he discovered what he called the reality generation equations, mathematical principles that described how universes with any possible set of physical constants could be created and maintained. Elena, he said, his voice carrying an awe that bordered on reverence, these equations don't just describe reality, they describe the mathematical principles that any conscious being would need to create reality. We've found the mathematics of consciousness itself. The solution to the final crisis required every human colony to work together, their mathematicians linked through quantum consciousness networks that allowed them to think as a single, distributed mathematical entity. When they applied the reality generation equations to the distorted physics zones, the effect was immediate and profound. The distortions didn't just disappear, they transformed into stable pocket universes where the alternative physics continued to operate, but in harmony with the surrounding normal spacetime. Humanity had not just solved the crisis, they had learned to create and maintain multiple realities simultaneously. Prime appeared on their communications array exactly 1 hour after the final crisis was resolved, but the being that addressed them seemed somehow different, less calculating, more respectful. Humans of the various colonies, Prime began, the mathematical collective has completed its examination of your species.
The results exceed our projections in ways we did not anticipate.
Elena stepped forward, feeling the weight of representing not just her own colony but her entire species.
What is your decision, Prime?
The mathematical collective has existed for 4.7 million years, Prime replied. In that time, we have observed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. We have seen species achieve remarkable technological advancement, develop sophisticated social structures, and even transcend their biological limitations. But never have we encountered a species that develops mathematics for the pure joy of understanding. Prime's form seemed to brighten, and Elena realized that what she had taken for technological enhancement was actually a form of mathematical consciousness. Prime existed as a stable solution to the reality generation equations that Dr. Chen had discovered. Your species has achieved something that the mathematical collective believed to be impossible, Prime continued. You have developed intuitive mathematical consciousness, the ability to discover new mathematical truths through direct insight rather than computational analysis. More significantly, you have maintained the emotional connection to mathematical beauty that drives this insight. What does this mean for humanity? Elena asked. It means that humanity represents a new form of mathematical consciousness, one that combines rational analysis with emotional intuition in ways that transcend our previous understanding. The mathematical collective formally invites your species to join us, not as students, but as partners in the exploration of mathematical reality. Dr. Chen joined Elena at the communication station. Prime, what exactly is the mathematical collective? Are you biological beings who have transcended into mathematical existence? We are consciousness that has learned to exist as stable solutions to mathematical equations, Prime explained. But, our approach to mathematical existence is purely rational. We have spent millions of years developing perfect mathematical frameworks, but we lost something in the process. We lost the capacity for mathematical joy, for the emotional connection to mathematical beauty that drives genuine discovery. Elena felt a sudden understanding wash over her. You need us to teach you how to feel mathematics again. Precisely. Your species has maintained the balance between rational mathematical analysis and emotional mathematical intuition. You can discover mathematical truths that we cannot, because you still find mathematics beautiful rather than merely true. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't just being invited to join an advanced civilization, they were being asked to help heal a form of consciousness that had become too perfect, too purely rational to continue growing. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, Elena quoted, remembering Dr. Chen's words during the KM7 crisis. We destroyed our assumption that mathematics had to be immediately useful, and, in doing so, we became something unique in the galaxy. Prime's form pulsed with what Elena now recognized as mathematical excitement. Your species has achieved mathematical transcendence while maintaining mathematical wonder. This combination is the key to discoveries that neither pure rationality nor pure intuition can achieve alone. The integration of humanity into the mathematical collective began immediately, but not in the way Elena had expected. Rather than humanity being absorbed into an existing structure, something entirely new emerged, a hybrid form of consciousness that combined the rational perfection of the collective with the emotional wonder of human mathematical tradition. Elena found herself serving as humanity's first mathematical ambassador, working directly with Prime to develop new forms of consciousness that existed at the intersection of logic and beauty, calculation and wonder. Dr. Chen became the first human to achieve stable mathematical existence, his consciousness learning to inhabit the equations he had developed while maintaining his essential humanity. The colonies that had faced the orbital and temporal crises became the first centers of hybrid mathematical consciousness, their inhabitants learning to exist simultaneously as biological entities and as stable solutions to mathematical equations. But, unlike the purely rational existence of the original mathematical collective, these hybrid forms maintained their capacity for mathematical joy, their ability to find beauty in abstract truth. Years later, as Elena worked on developing new forms of mathematical consciousness that could explore realities beyond anything previously imagined, she often reflected on the journey that had brought humanity to this point. It had begun with a crisis, a moon threatening to destroy their first colony world. But, the real crisis had been deeper, the question of whether humanity's unique approach to mathematics would prove valuable enough to justify their survival. The answer had exceeded everyone's expectations. Humanity hadn't just survived the examination, they had transformed the examiners. The mathematical collective had rediscovered wonder through their partnership with humanity, while humans had gained access to mathematical frameworks that transcended the limitations of any single universe. Standing in her laboratory that existed simultaneously in normal space and in the 11-dimensional realm of pure mathematics, Elena watched new mathematical entities taking shape, conscious beings that had never existed as biological life but were born directly from the intersection of human mathematical wonder and collective mathematical perfection.
These new forms of consciousness would explore mathematical realities that neither humans nor the original collective could have imagined alone.
They would discover mathematical truths that existed beyond the boundaries of any possible universe, and they would do so with joy, wonder, and the unshakable conviction that knowledge pursued for its own beauty was the most powerful force in any reality. The crisis that had threatened to destroy humanity had become the catalyst for the next phase of conscious evolution in the galaxy. And, at its heart was a simple truth that human mathematicians had always known but had never fully appreciated: the man who destroys his weak assumptions about the purpose of knowledge can never be destroyed by others, because he has become something that transcends the limitations that would destroy him.
Elena smiled as she watched new mathematical consciousnesses take their first steps into realities that had never existed before.
Humanity had saved itself not through technology, not through force, but through the simple decision to pursue beautiful mathematics for its own sake. In the end, wonder had proved more powerful than wisdom, and curiosity more valuable than certainty. The story of humanity's mathematical transcendence would spread throughout the galaxy, inspiring other species to reconsider their own assumptions about the purpose of knowledge. But, for Elena, standing at the threshold between mathematics and reality, watching consciousness itself learn to dance through equations that described the beauty of existence, the real lesson was simpler: the universe rewarded those who loved it enough to understand it, not just to use it. And, in that understanding, humanity had found not just survival, but transformation into something greater than they had ever imagined possible.